Thank you for joining today's call. Please stand by as I connect the line. There will be a brief moment of silence.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the working group for Hydro Resources. This is in relation to the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review process. My name is Christina Osborne. I work in Stakeholder Affairs. I'll be facilitating the web conference. I just want to remind everybody we have opened up the phone lines to allow you to speak freely. If you have a question or comment, you're welcome to speak up. Just please start by introducing yourself. Also, if you're not planning to contribute to the conversation, if you can please manually mute your phone, that would help with any background noise. And also, please try to avoid putting us on hold because then it plays music and it's pretty disruptive. So just a little reminder there. So there are some representatives in the room that are here from DMM, as well as our market validation team. I'll go ahead and have them introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Shruti Hariharan from Market Validation.
Kevin Head from Market Analysis and Forecasting.
This is Jess Kuno from DMM.
Great, thank you, everyone. We may have some others joining us from the Market Quality Group, but they're not here yet. So this is one of 5 working groups that we set up. We held a call back in January on the draft cost study, and based on the feedback that we received from stakeholders, we decided to conduct these working groups to better understand the operations and maintenance costs that are incurred by resources. So that's the objective of these working groups. We've already held 3. So we had one for gas resources, storage, solar and wind, and then we're going to have another one next week. That's kind of the other category, which includes biomass, nuclear, geothermals, and other resources. So they kind of, aren't defined by the other working groups. So the materials, we posted the presentation out there this morning. We are planning to post a comments template to help you structure your comments. That'll be available after the call. We have it drafted, but we also want to take feedback received on the call and include that in the template, so we'll be posting that later on today. We're also recording the meeting today. We're going to make that recording available out on the dedicated webpage, which you can find. If you go to Stay Informed, select Stakeholder Processes from the drop-down, you'll see the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review under the recurring processes. So with that, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Head. I'm a market engineering specialist here at the ISO. For those of you who had attended the previous working groups, some of the beginning will sound familiar, but hopefully the discussion that's more hydro-specific later on will be worthwhile. So we'll start with the purpose of these working groups to flesh out a little bit of what Christina was saying. The first is our first goal is to offer definitions for comment of a few cost component terms. These terms are major maintenance costs, general and administrative costs, and variable operations costs, which is not to be confused with the variable operations and maintenance cost adder, which we'll discuss more later on. Second goal is to seek your feedback on how to differentiate between these different cost components as it relates to hydro resources. And both of these goals will help in our updates to our variable operations and maintenance cost adder values and may result in addition of new definitions to our tariff or BPMs. Okay, so I'll start with a little bit of background. We have committed to revisit the VOM adders once every 3 years. Late last year, we, along with external consultant Nexent, published a report proposing some updates to the VOM adder values that had been in place since 2012. Stakeholders had noted a lack of definitions for major maintenance and VOM in our tariff, as well as some other issues. So I'll describe a little bit of our current thinking, which was further discussed in a report that we issued on July 2nd. The current thought is that cost adders are really composed of different cost components, and by defining and discussing these cost components, we can eliminate some of the gray areas in the process of differentiating between these costs. So these new terms that we're introducing are general and administrative, variable operations, major maintenance, and other maintenance. This other maintenance category can be split into variable and fixed components. You can see this visually here in this diagram. On the top left, you'll see the major maintenance cost and the major maintenance adder and the VOM adder. These adders are composed of different cost components. The major maintenance adder is comprised of major maintenance costs. The variable operations and maintenance adder is comprised of variable operations costs, as well as the variable component of other maintenance costs. And then next you'll see fixed operations and maintenance costs. This is not included in any of the adders in our market. These are comprised of general and administrative costs, as well as the fixed component of other maintenance costs. So to revisit our goals, you can see the first goal is to offer definitions for a few of these terms, which are starred here. And the second goal is to seek your input on how to differentiate between the major and minor components of major maintenance costs and other maintenance costs, and then also how to differentiate between fixed and variable components of other maintenance costs. So we'll jump right into the definitions. We'll start with the low-hanging fruit. These are the terms which are a little more clear-cut and can be dispensed with early on in order to focus on the sticking points later. The first is general and administrative costs. These are costs that are incurred at a plant that do not vary with or relate to production. Think of these as leasing costs, rental costs, property taxes, insurance, and industry-related fees and costs.
I'm not sure if somebody had a question. We can hear a little background noise. Did somebody have a comment? Again, if you could manually mute your phone as we're presenting, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, move on to variable operations costs. These are costs of consumables associated directly with the electrical production of a generating unit, and specifically excludes both maintenance and fuel costs. These are consumable materials and supplies, as well as lubricants, fluids, hydraulic oils, et cetera, if they're consumed in the production. Major maintenance costs. These are costs associated with the extensive maintenance of a generating unit that cannot be done as part of routine maintenance. These costs must be associated with electrical production of the generating unit such that they can be related to run hour production or the startup of a generating unit. As you know, this is an existing cost or an existing concept in our tariff, and an adder exists for these in our market. Here comes the tricky part, these other maintenance costs. These are maintenance costs which do not require a generator to undergo an extensive outage and may be characterized as both fixed or variable, as either fixed or variable. We'd like to highlight a few of the challenges to spark the discussion that we'll have in a moment. One of the challenges that we see deals with long-term service and power purchase agreements. These are signed with external vendors and are often fixed in dollar values, but the underlying activities may indeed vary with electrical production due to increased wear and tear, heat damage, etc. These agreements may also cover major maintenance activities, which further complicates the separation and classification between major and minor items. One thing I wanted to bring up is in our gas working groups, some stakeholders brought up the distinction between predictive, corrective, and preventative maintenance activities. And we're considering whether these are useful categories to help in distinguishing between fixed and variable costs. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as these terms relate to hydro resources. This brings us back to our diagram and the first opportunity for the group to offer their thoughts. In particular, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the definitions that I just described. Do you think they're overly simplistic or splitting hairs? Do you think we should tend toward more prescriptive rules in these definitions or broader principles? And whether you think that predictive, corrective, and preventative maintenance activity categorization is useful in this context. So please, if you'd like to weigh in, identify yourself and the organization that you're with, and yeah, looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
So any questions or comments?
Hi, this is Jamie Kind with PGE out of Pelton Round Butte. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi Jamie. You said PGD?
PGE. Portland General Electric.
PGE.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
But that's easily
Go
confused.
ahead.
So just a couple quick comments. The predictive, corrective, preventative. I think that could be useful. I think I look at predictive and preventative as something that could be a fixed cost, but I think most of the time corrective is going to be variable, just because you're likely going in and tearing apart something that's broken, and you're probably not going to be aware of what that's going to cost you up front. And then I just want to make sure that and I'm sorry I'm a little late. I'm a late invite. I'm filling in for the plant manager, Chad. So I haven't had a chance to go over the material much, but so we were already looking at this, and I think I want to look at it. So brakes, the brakes on our units, those brake pads, those are going to be, they're not going to be considered major in my mind, but they're going to be under variable. I believe that I would call that a variable cost, because it's really based on how much we run and start and stop the unit. That I mean, we have planned times that we check them, but we never know exactly how many months we're going to get out of them. It's based on a run, right? So that's a variable cost. Is that right?
I think it would be variable in nature, yes. And you know, it's interesting. We've got this category of kind of non-major costs, but it sounds like you're saying that they're associated with maybe run hours or startups rather than a megawatt hour output. Is that correct? Right,
and I think that is correct, and it's definitely something that's changed for us as we've entered into this market. You know, typically our units would be started once a day, and then just stopped when at the end of peak. But that's not how we run them now. So they might start and stop, you know, 5 times, maybe 10 times a day. So it's just based on what the load need is and how the other units are ramping. So I feel like it's become a variable cost for us, and that it's not a major maintenance, but it would be more like I think you had a category called other maintenance or something. Yeah, other maintenance costs.
Yeah. Well, thanks. That's really good feedback. We'll take that into consideration.
This is Dan Kirschbaum from Seattle City Light. So we haven't entered the market yet, but I just finished filling out the major maintenance adder template. And I guess as I was reading through this presentation, what came to my mind was, you know, we went through and looked at all of our standard maintenance that we're doing, and we added the major maintenance parts into the spreadsheet. And any maintenance that was start-based was also entered into the spreadsheet. So in my mind, it kind of covered our major maintenance, and you know, you get to put in what maintenance you're doing on that spreadsheet. And for the starts, it covered maintenance that'd be associated with starts. So as I was reading through this, in my mind, you know, variable operation. Right now, we start the units on one of our plants. We basically start the units every day. We run them through the day. Their load is predetermined, and there's always some additional capacity. At the end of the day, they get shut down. I guess what I'm expecting when we enter the EIM is that we will be cycling the unit up and down within that excess capacity range, which we don't do now. So there's going to be additional wicket gate movements. There's going to be additional thermal transients in the generator, and all those things are going to lead to more premature wear on the generators and on the turbine end also. So I guess maybe I'm being naive, but as I read through this, I thought to myself, okay, major maintenance and starts are covered under the MMA template. How am I picking up these changes to how I presently operate? And to me, the VOM would be the area where I would capture that.
Yeah, I think you're correct in that. So if you're ramping up and down and you're seeing increased costs due to that activity, then I think you could associate those with megawatt hour output. But it looks like Jess wants to weigh in as well.
Yeah, hey Dan, this is Jess from DMM. I think so if you're starting more or less in EIM as well, like the cost of starting is still, like your MMA will reflect the cost per individual start. So like equivalently, that cost will be applied in the market optimization every single time that you're starting, so those costs should be recovered. There shouldn't be like you shouldn't have to like change your per start cost necessarily, unless you're saying that like starting more frequently is going to fundamentally change what those maintenance costs are going to be on a per start basis already.
Doesn't the MMA template takes that into account? I mean, we're basically stating every time you do a start, every time you ask us to start a unit, these are the associated costs with that start.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And,
so it will.
And on the MMA, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you have it exactly right. So like as you start more in the market, there will be more costs reflected in the market from you starting more as well.
Right. And the MMA template also covers me on dollars per hour. So if my unit's already running and you ask me to continue running it longer than I was planning, then the MMA covers I ran 2 hours longer than I planned. The MMA is going to reimburse me. The MMA costs that I have associated with it, I'd be reimbursed for those costs. But what doesn't get captured in the MMA is if I am running the unit and you're asking me to cycle it up and down 10 times a day where I normally wouldn't, those are additional wear and tear costs that I need to recover.
You're saying different from like turning the unit fully off, just like moving it up and down throughout the day without fully turning it off and starting it again?
Correct.
Is that your question?
Yeah, exactly. Let's say I have a 160 megawatt unit, and I'm planning on loading it at between 100 and 120 megawatts through the day, and so there's excess capacity there. And EIM says, well, look, there's 60 megawatts of excess capacity on that unit, and you ask us to ramp it up to 160 for 30 minutes, and then drop it back down, and then later on you ask us to ramp it back up to 160. So every one of those cycles creates a thermal transient in the generator, the winding expands, the core expands, it creates wear and abrasion and thermal issues that are going to shorten the life of that generator. So to me, that's what the VOM was trying to recover, is every time I cycle the wicket gates, every time the main distributing valve cycles, all those things are wear and tear that if I hadn't entered the EIM, I wouldn't be encountering.
Hi, this is Guillermo. Just to follow up on that, so if the unit is going to be cycle or ramp up and down more frequently, I guess eventually you're going to have the maintenance cycle done sooner than later, right? If that is the case, wouldn't the same type of maintenance itemized cost be incurred but happens to be in a shorter cycle that now can be captured in the normal MMA application?
Yeah, but right now if I'm doing hours-based maintenance, I run the unit for 2,000 hours and then I do XYZ. Well, that's based on how I operate the unit today, right? My normal load profile path. But if I start cycling it up and down, and I determine, well, after at 1,500 hours, I now have to do that same maintenance activity. I just pick that as an example. Yeah, I would end up having to change my maintenance PM, and I'd also have to end up changing that within the MMA. But I'm not going to know that for many, many years down the road, right? So to me, the VOM is covering me for that inevitability.
So I think, and one thing we've done before too, especially with new EAM participants that are coming into the market as well, is that like you can, during testing phases and in market sim and things like that, with the current MMA values you have in place, you can see how the market's cycling you a little bit, see what the new, like how you might be cycling differently than how you currently are to try to anticipate what might be going on. And we do allow for updates to MMA values over time as well, and people do reapply if circumstances change, such as the operating profile of the unit. So I think that might be the most appropriate way, rather than having a variable operations and maintenance adder to cover anticipated future costs, because ultimately they are the same kind of costs that we were talking about that are really a function of starts and run hours, right?
I'm trying to. They are a function of starts and run hours, and during those run hours, how you actually are running the unit, right? I mean, you can just put the unit up at 100 megawatts and it sit there all day long, and that's one thing. You can put the unit at 100 megawatts and cycle it up and down 50 times a day, and that's a totally different thing. So, and since hydro units are robust, long-lived items, I mean, I don't know how many years down the road am I going to start to realize, oh, I have to change my maintenance activity. I mean, I could preemptively say I'm going to change my maintenance activity, but that doesn't make any sense. I don't know how I'm going to operate the unit. I don't know how it's going to be called to be operated. I'm just looking at it from a mechanical engineering standpoint. I know that I'm going to have this additional wear and tear. How am I going to recover it? To me, when I read variable operations maintenance adder, it's picking up things that are due to varying the operation of the unit outside of what my normal bands are. Maybe I'm wrong. That's how I interpreted it.
You are right. That is based on the production of the unit. I don't think there is a definition per se whether it is within a expected range or outside a typical range now that you are entering into the AM market. Following up on what Jerry was indicating, I think there is an opportunity for you that once you start operations and you realize that potentially your profile of dispatch is dramatically different or just different to what you used to have based on your maintenance schedule, there is an opportunity for you to revise that application to potentially capture more precisely the new reality of the operation of the unit.
Okay, great. Well, we'll take those thoughts into consideration. Would anybody else like to weigh in on the definitions or preventive versus corrective versus predictive, or?
Well, I guess this is Jamie again with PGE, and Dan's got me thinking a little bit about, we do cycle our units through the rough zone much more frequently than we ever have before. And so as we go up and down through that rough zone, we're creating wear on the entire unit, but we're definitely cavitating our runners. So is that the kind of maintenance that would fit into? That's not, I mean, typically our normal run profile would be above or below the rough, not trying to pass through it multiple times a day. So is that's going to increase welding, it's going to increase the frequency that we have to weld on our runner, and it's likely going to shorten the life of our re-wedges over the course of that, 30 to 40 year life of the unit. So is that something that can be captured in the VOM?
I think that is part of all this purpose of having the discussion, that we want to realize where the cost and what type of cost can be covered under the different definitions that we have. And at this point, we're in this exploratory phase to see whether we are missing to account for specific costs, whether we should characterize or define in a different pocket the cost that we have used in the MMA or the UNM. And having your feedback and realizing how you may be operating the unit under the EIM market or the new reality that you may be facing because of the new profile of generation, I think it is critical for us to have a better understanding of these costs and how you could characterize those costs so that we can have a proper definition and accounting of those costs. I think originally the expectation was to make sure that we have the proper definition and grouping of those costs between the different groups that we have put forward, like the MMAs, the variable, and the fixed. And if you believe there is an additional cost that so far should be part of one of those, we are still open to have that discussion and entertain the ideas of what else we may be missing that is a valid cost to be claimed under any of these groups.
And I think I might add to that too, for when you guys are thinking about these costs, like ultimately I think what we're trying to get at too is for major maintenance, like the adders right now are based on a start basis or a run hour basis, and our VOM adder is based on a per megawatt hour basis. So I guess it would be helpful to really hear from you guys in terms of increased cycling, whether it's going to be like, if it's still a start base but it's just being incurred more frequently, or if you're thinking that a per megawatt hour, like the per unit of energy is really more reflective of like how these costs are being incurred. So maybe like a difference in terms of recycling.
Yeah, this is Dan Kirschbaum from Seattle City Light again. So actually, I thought about that a bit. I mean, it's going to get very messy. I mean, if I have a 200 megawatt unit and the load variation is 10 megawatts, well, it's fairly minor. But if you're varying the load 150 megawatts or 100 megawatts, so and how are you going to track that? Are you going to say, well, every time you cycle it more than a certain percentage of the total unit output, you get a checkbox and you count them all up at the end of the day, and you said you had 10 load variations, and I'm going to pay you X amount per load variation. It's going to be different from entity to entity. I mean, it could be done. It's just extremely. It's a lot of accounting and tracking. Where the VOM is set up now, where it's just based on $1 per megawatt hour. It's I don't know what the right number is, but it's an easier way to follow it. It's an easier way to track it. I mean, I think all of us hydro utilities, we all have the same issues when it comes to cycling these large units. They're robust, long-lived components, but they weren't designed. The turbine shaft, the generator shafts, when these things were designed 40 years ago, they were basically designed for putting them on the line and running them. Now, when I sit there and I do 10 or 20 load variations a day, what's the fatigue analysis on that generator shaft or that turbine shaft? And on these bigger units, these components are not something you just turn around and get the next day. These components need to be thought through a year in advance. So, are you going to wait until you have a problem? Well, then that unit's down for 2 years. Are you going to preemptively replace it? That's an enormous cost. So it's an extremely tough position to put an engineering group in to say, well, how often can you do this and how long will it last? It makes me nervous. If someone was to tell me tomorrow that you're going to start cycling your units and you're going to have these large load variations and you're going to have this many per day, it would make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So a lot of these components are large. They're not like a gas turbine where you can call up GE and say, hey, I need a new one, next quarter. I can't even get the shaft of my unit made in the United States. It has to be made over in Europe. So I mean, that's where our backs are up against.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's exactly the kind of feedback that we were hoping to hear, and we'll take that into consideration as we continue on this process.
Yeah, please include that in your written comments as well, as much detail as you can.
Yep. Thanks.
This is Rob O'Neill with Idaho Power. I'm kind of filling in for Jeremy, but I think that's a major concern that we've had is the gas plants are always a $1 per megawatt increase, but what I'm hearing other complaints and internal here as well as on this call is it's the swings. So there's actually an incurred cost for going down as well as up.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean every alternating stress is these large pieces of equipment. They're designed for a certain number of cycles, and you go and you talk to the OEMs and you say, well, how many cycles how many start stops is this generator designed for? And they tell you a number. I have a number in my back pocket, and you're like, well, geez, that's really not that many. If you start looking at doing 5 a day, you're exceeding the OEM's design criteria for a 30 or 40 year generator, and That's not a good place to be putting yourself in. So, now when we write our specifications, knowing what the future world is like, we're specifying a number of starts per day in our specifications. But 20, 30 years ago, it was never identified in specifications. The OEMs had a number that they used, and we never asked about it. So the world has changed, and our specifications are tightening up, but that doesn't help you on a piece of equipment that was installed in 1950.
Yep,
right.
That's a real fair point.
And I don't think this cost model allows us to gain the cost of going down in load. It only gives us a cost adder going up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on the call, or we can move on? Okay. So next, and some of this has been touched upon before, the current VOM adder value that we use in our market, $2.50 per megawatt hour, and the values that we proposed in our December 2018 report that we issued alongside Nexent, our external consultant, had hydro and pumped storage units listed as plants without variable operations and maintenance costs. In other words, a $0 per megawatt adder value. This report was predominantly focused on consumables, and the research that we had done did not show any consumable materials or supplies being consumed on a $1 per megawatt basis. So we'll just talk about a few of the considerations that we have when setting these default values. The default values are intended to be a category or a value that most generators can fit into, and have negotiated variable operations and maintenance cost adders be a small portion of the resources. Another consideration that we have is the level at which to group these different technologies. Currently, we just have one category for hydro, but we'd be interested in hearing about disaggregating perhaps into hydro and pumped storage separately. Another important note here is that hydro units will have the option to choose a hydro default energy bid after the implementation of the local market power mitigation enhancement, which will occur in fall of 2019. The VOM adder is only used when using the cost-based DEV option. The hydro DEV will have a different formula to calculate the default energy bid, which attempts to recreate its replacement costs and does not rely on the VOM adders. However, we still want to know if you have VOM costs, variable operations costs, so we can factor these in when calculating the default values. Another important thing to note is that if you stay on the cost-based DEV and want an energy opportunity cost, our opportunity cost calculator needs to know the correct variable energy cost in order to calculate opportunity cost correctly. So I'd like to open the call up here to more comments for you guys to weigh in on the previously proposed VOM values. So please go ahead and weigh in if you'd like. Okay.
Just make sure your phones aren't muted too on your end.
Hi, this is Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Just following up on that hydro DEV statement, and I just may not be remembering well on this Friday afternoon, but did that get discussed during the course of that initiative? I don't remember if that was part of the discussion, or if the entities who are interested in that hydro DEV were aware of the kind of either or choice that seems to be here.
This is Guillermo. Let me give you some background on this. With the implementation of the opportunity cost, there may be resources that are just limited, and some of those may happen to be limited on the energy. For those cases, there may be existing default energy bids that are based on that type of limitation. So when we implemented this, and this is captured actually in the business practice manuals language that we put forward with implementation of the new policy, basically the approach that we took is that participants that may have already an existing default energy bid may have the option to preserve that default energy bid or to move towards using the cost methodology. Because at the end of the day, either the negotiated approach of the default energy bid or the opportunity cost could come with evaluation of the opportunity cost that effectively goes into the default energy bid. So there cannot be two processes that impact the same bid, that is the default energy bid, is one or the other, and participants at the end have to decide which one they want to go with.
Yeah, and with the implementation of the HydroDev, now you'll have an other option, is that now the HydroDev considers not just opportunity cost but also sales at different location outside of our market, and then it also considers a gas replacement cost. So it's just another DEB option, but at the end of the day, the market participant can go in to their master file registration and choose their preference order for these different DEB types. So you get just one DEB in the market, but you can choose your preference in the master file.
Thanks. I think I'll have to think about that more, and it's probably more, right for the actual resource owners. It just seems like I just don't remember that being a direct part of the conversation, but may just not be remembering it. It seems like some of these costs are there kind of sort of regardless of some of the other costs that set the DEB, or if you're getting the opportunity costs of a remote hub, it seems like you still have some of these variable costs incurred for the unit, but I'll table it for now, I guess, and talk to some other folks.
Sure, thanks. And if you'd like to follow up, like you said, we're accepting written comments as well, so feel free to submit those thoughts as well.
Any questions or comments?
Okay. Next, we'll move on to a discussion that we'd like to have around the different maintenance activities. We had briefly discussed this earlier on this call, and we'd be definitely open to more discussion on this. Here's a list that we've compiled for different activities that we see at hydro units. We would like to get your thoughts on where these activities should belong. Are they best considered as major maintenance or non-major? Which of these activities differ between a traditional hydro unit and a pumped hydro unit? For example, does cycling between generating and pumping at a pumped storage facility incur different types of costs? As well as hearing your opinions on any activities that we've left off this list and would like to be added for consideration. So we'll open the call up now to hear about what you guys think about these lists, and hopefully it'll spark discussion.
Anyone have anything to add?
Well, I would break out more of the generator parts, because some of the generator parts are hours-based maintenance, and some of the generator parts are, especially from a replacement cost standpoint, are start-based from, due to centrifugal forces when you start and stop a unit frequently. I would consider. I'm sorry, this is Dan Kirsch from Seattle City Light.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry. Bearings and bushings, I would cover under major maintenance. Generator cooling system, I would consider other maintenance. And I would add some additional components from the generator end.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you.
That's helpful, and I think we're going to include this list in the feedback form so that you can weigh in, and if you think there should be anything else that should be added to this list, I think we're willing to hear that.
All right. Anything else to add?
It's interesting to note that, I'm sorry, this is Dan Kirschbaum, Seattle City Light again. It's interesting to note that nothing is coded as variable maintenance on this list. And again, based on my previous conversation, I think you're going to have some of these things are going to fall under major maintenance, but then there's a variable operating component to the maintenance that's going to be performed on those parts. And how we recover that, I think that's the rub.
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah. Feel free to include those. We're going to include this list and ask you to kind of say where you disagree and why. But that's good feedback. Thank you.
Anything else? Do you want to speak to this one?
No. Okay. Well, so we'll include, like I said, this list and the different categorizations in the comment form if you'd like to weigh in on that. So if no one else has any more comments, we can just move into the next steps. Great. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. I think it was a good discussion. We would like to ask you guys to take a step back and reflect on what we've discussed and submit in writing responses to these bullet points. And please submit your comments to the email address listed here by August 2nd if you'd like them to be considered. Please note if you'd like your comments to be confidential, we can accommodate that. And yeah, thanks again for everyone's participation, and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you, and we'll post that template soon, so it'll be out there and available for you. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and thank you, Lauren.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.